Welcome back, guys. I'm looking to reach 1,000 subs. Support me by clicking the subscribe button.
She broke the internet in Rome. Alex Ila's 2-minute moment that made millions cry and changed everything. Nobody was supposed to see it. There were no cameras officially set up at that gate. No press coordinator was waiting with a microphone. No PR team had arranged this in advance. No one had sent out a schedule or drafted a social media post or told anyone that anything was about to happen at that small, unassuming player's exit on the side of the Foro Italico on a warm May evening in Rome. It was just a quiet gate. A handful of people, a girl with a bag over her shoulder and a bandaged ankle walking slowly in their direction. And then everything changed. Within 60 minutes of what happened next, 5 million people had watched the footage on TikTok alone. By the time the Italian sun came up the following morning, that number had exploded past 20 million across every platform on the internet. Comment sections overflowed. News anchors in the Philippines were fighting back tears on live television. Overseas Filipino workers sitting in apartments from Milan to Dubai to Toronto to Riyadh were sending the clip to every person they knew with a single message. Watch this. Just watch this. And the world did. This is the story of Alex Ila, a 20-year-old Filipino tennis player who went to Rome and lost her match, and somehow managed to win absolutely everything else. This is the story of what she did when the cameras weren't supposed to be rolling, when she had every excuse in the world to simply go home, when not a single person would have blamed her for disappearing into a hotel room and closing the curtains. This is the story of a moment so raw and so human and so deeply, fiercely, unmistakably Filipino that it stopped the internet dead in its tracks and made millions of strangers cry for reasons they are still trying to explain. Buckle up, because this one is going to get you right in the chest. Let's talk about where Alex Ila was in her career when she walked into the 2026 Italian Open at the Foro Italico Sports Complex in Rome. Because context matters. And the context here is that this young woman had already done things that no Filipino tennis player had ever done before in the entire history of the sport. Let that land for a second. At just 20 years old, Alexandra Ila had already cracked the WTA Top 100, the first Filipino ever to do so. She had walked onto the grandstand courts of the US Open and beaten a major champion, the first Filipino player to win a Grand Slam match in the Open era. She had lit up the Miami Open like a fireworks show, eliminating Yelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and world number 1 Iga Swiatek back-to-back in what commentators called one of the most jaw-dropping runs by a wildcard in the tournament's history. She had done all of this before her 20th birthday. She had done all of this while carrying the weight of an entire nation's hopes on her shoulders. The Philippines had never had a player like her, and the Filipino community, scattered across every continent, living and working in countries far from home, holding onto their national identity with both hands, had never had a moment quite like this one in professional tennis. So when Alex arrived in Rome for the 2026 Italian Open, the Filipino diaspora mobilized. That is the only word for it. They mobilized. Flags came out of suitcases. Group chats lit up across every Filipino community WhatsApp and Viber group in Italy, in Europe, across the entire globe. People who had been living in Rome for over a decade, OFWs, overseas Filipino workers, who had left home to build better lives for families they rarely got to see in person, suddenly had a reason to take a day off, or as one fan Richard Pure from Batangas cheerfully admitted, to simply sneak out of work. Some flew in from across Europe. Some came with families. Some came alone, wearing their Philippine flags like capes, chanting Laban Alex. Fight, Alex, into the ancient Roman air like the sound had always belonged there. And in a way, it had. The opening round had been electric. Alex faced Magdalena Frek of Poland in a battle that went the full 3 sets. A gritty, nerve-shredding 6-0, 3-6, 6-4 victory that sent the Filipino fans inside the Foro Italico absolutely berserk. As she walked off the court, she turned to the crowd that had been screaming her name for nearly 2 hours, and she said simply, Salamat. Thank you. Just that one word. And somehow it said everything. The Filipino fans in the stands who had scrambled at the last minute for tickets, who had rearranged their entire schedules to be there, who had stood and shouted until their voices gave out, felt something in that word that went far beyond tennis. They felt seen. The chants echoed off the marble statues and the cypress trees and the ancient stone of a venue that has witnessed some of the greatest sporting moments in human history. Forza Alex. Leben Alex. Let's go Alex. And for a community that spends most of its life being invisible, working behind the scenes of the countries that host them, sending money home, missing birthdays, missing funerals, missing the ordinary Tuesday moments that make up a life, this was not invisible at all. This was the Philippines on a global stage, loud and proud and undeniable. Then came a match against world number 2 Elena Rybakina. Elena Rybakina is a Grand Slam champion. She is a power player of the highest order, the kind of opponent who can end a match in ways that feel less like tennis and more like a natural disaster. She owns 13 career singles titles. She was the second seed in Rome, and she was not, to put it kindly, going to make life easy for anyone standing on the other side of the net. Alex gave her everything she had. She struck first in the opening set, battled point by point, and cut the deficit to 4-5 before Rybakina closed it out. The second set followed at 6-3. The score was 6-4, 6-3 to Rybakina. By any conventional measure, Alex had lost. The tournament was over for her. She shook hands at the net with grace, acknowledged the crowd with that characteristic mix of composure and genuine feeling that has made her so beloved, and walked off the court. Most players in that situation do the same thing. They get into the car. They go to the hotel. They close the curtains. They process the loss privately. They protect themselves. Nobody would have criticized Alex for disappearing. She was 20 years old. She had just lost to the world number 2 in front of a crowd that had traveled from multiple countries specifically to watch her win. And she had every right in the world to simply be a human being dealing with a difficult day. But she didn't go to the hotel. She sat in the royal box with her mother, watching the tournament continue. Her face held that composure that young athletes learn to wear in public when the pain is private, but her eyes were carrying something much heavier. She watched other players compete on the court she had just left. She watched the tournament move on without her, as tournaments always do. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, she made a decision. She excused herself. She moved carefully, because her ankle was still tender from the strain of competing, past the VIP section, past the security personnel who recognized her and stepped aside without a word, and she made her way toward the player's exit. Not the main entrance, not the media zone, the small side gate where a small group of fans had been standing for hours, not demanding anything, not pushing against barriers, just hoping to be seen. What Alex found at that gate was not the enormous crowd that had packed the stadium during her matches. That crowd had thinned as the tournament moved on. What remained was something smaller, and in a way far more powerful. There were families. There was a little girl, let's call her Sophia, wearing a Philippine flag around her shoulders like a cape, maybe 10 years old, born in Italy to Filipino parents who had left home years before she arrived, a child who had grown up watching Filipino athletes on a TV screen in an Italian apartment. There was an elderly woman near the back of the group, leaning on a cane, arms trembling slightly but Philippine flag still raised, still held high, because she had not come this far to let it drop. These were people who had spent money they could not easily spare. They had spent time they could not easily spare. They were overseas Filipino workers, domestic workers, and care workers, and construction workers and restaurant workers, people who had built entire lives in a country that was not theirs so they could support families in a country they rarely got to visit. And they had come to this gate because being close to Alex Ila, even for 2 minutes, even for one moment, meant being close to something that reflected them back at themselves on a global stage. Alex reached into her bag. And this is the part where the story becomes something other than a sports story. Because what she pulled out was not a pen for autographs, not a stack of official tournament merchandise, not sponsor freebies organized by a brand team. She pulled out shirts, her own shirts, personal shirts bearing her own logo, the AE emblem she had designed herself for her own personal brand, the brand she had been quietly building alongside her tennis career. These shirts were not available in any store. You could not find them on a website. They were not handed out at sponsored events. They were hers, and she started giving them away. The fauchette went to the little girl in the front row wearing the flag like a cape. Alex didn't hand it across like you'd pass someone a program. She knelt down slightly, held it out, and said quietly, Paris Saio. For you.
Welcome back, guys. I'm looking to reach 1,000 subs. Support me by clicking the subscribe button.